Let's take a look at the vaccine rollout now around the nation. Melburnians are beginning to increase their surge up the vaccine ladder. It's still Sydney, though, way ahead of the rest of the country. Let's dive into some of the localised data now with my colleague Tom Connell. And Tom, the impressive thing about Sydney's vaccine rate is that it's high and growing rapidly.
It's impressive. It's also really encouraging for where we end up. Of course, 80 is the target, but the higher the better, Kieran. So taking a look at some of the places around Sydney, some of the regions that are leading so far in terms of this vaccine rollout. The story here is the high number, but when you look at the percentage increase per week, that's what's particularly impressive. Blacktown, 86.1, up 9.4%. That means 9.4% of this area got a first dose in the past week. It's a massive surge. Parramatta, 78.4%. Again, that's up 9%. And the southwest, up 10%. So all of these areas still going so fast. What that means is we're not about to just limp to 86 or 87. We will see these percentages slow down, but they're going to go well into 80, maybe even to 90s. We'll see. Melbourne as well is beginning to go a bit more quickly. And yes, we've had a bit of debate today around distribution of vaccines and so on. But when we look at Melbourne and some of these areas, they are a lot lower, but it's the percentage increases in brackets that are encouraging. Outer east, up to 62, up 5%. Inner south, up 4.7%, and a better overall number at 68, and the west of Melbourne as well at 56%. So these numbers are starting to increase. We could see it turn into a flood because they know in Melbourne as well, they're waiting on these vaccinations getting up to 70, 80%. Yeah. These are all first dose, of course, get to second dose before they get real freedom back.
Yep, and WA, Queensland, the two states lagging. Does the fact that it's they've got very large regions, is that part of the story here?
It is part of the story because that's the overall story so far of the vaccine rollout. The region's set to be lagging behind some of the others. We took a look at WA recently. Let's look at Queensland today. I'm calling it the crawl. Perhaps that's a bit unkind. But again, this is first dose data. Cairns at 55%. Only up 2.7% in a week. If you extrapolate that out, think about them getting to 80%. You're talking about quite a number of weeks, 8-9 weeks before they get there. Brisbane East. So this is actually not a regional area, obviously. Only up 3.4% and at 58% overall. So again, nowhere near some of those Melbourne and also Sydney figures there. And Ipswich, yes, it's regional, but it's not too far from Brisbane. Look at the laggard here, 47.6%. At 3.5%, we're talking quite a number of weeks before it would get to 70 and then 80. So that's the concern there in terms of Queensland. We looked at WA recently. Yeah. They are the two states with the least incentive perhaps right now to get vaccinated, but you know, it needs to happen at some point.
Yeah, it doesn't take long for that incentive, as we've seen, to erupt amid an outbreak, Tom. And when we go even more localised in terms of looking at the data, you've found there's quite a stark divide, city-country?
Yeah, there is at the moment, although there are some interesting exceptions. So this is some of the even more localised data. West Pilbara. Now, these are the lowest first dose rates. This number just jumps out to me a bit, 20.5%. It's extraordinarily low. We know this is a mining area, and this could be the sort of thing skewed by FIFO workers. So I put it up as the lowest, but I'm a bit reluctant to call that some sort of indicative figure. Beenleigh is an interesting one. We're talking the Logan area of southeast Queensland. Again, it's not too far from Brisbane, 42.2%. So when we're talking about some of the lower rates here, we are going to talk about regions and hard areas to reach, but also outer suburbs. And I think that's the area we're going to talk about hesitancy down the track. Swan I've put in here as a bit of an outlier. It's in Perth, it's metropolitan, it's a very low rate. When we look at some of those surging ahead, again on this very localised data, we see a little bit of a different story. And again, we're talking about, first of all, the first class marks when we bring up the data to Sydney. Pennant Hills, 89.1%. There was actually one thing on here, Kieran, that was more than 100%. That shows that this data can be skewed. Yeah. So clearly the number of people in the area versus those vaccinated, not always perfectly matched. But Pennant Hills, 89.1. Darwin City, a good sign for the NT, 86.8%. So that's the inner part of Darwin. And Dubbo is an interesting one. They had an outbreak, 76.1%. Two things clearly driving this, and this is well ahead of a lot of regional areas and surrounds. Not just the fact that they are inspired to get the vaccine, but they got supply as well. And so this is going to be the thing about the regions and outer areas. They will get more supply. You would think they might not catch up all the way, but they can go a long way towards that in the next few weeks.
Very interesting numbers, Tom. Thanks for going through that data for us this afternoon, Tom Connell.